Okay, so you're able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so let us begin then. So today we will be starting a new topic, which is the topic of source coding. Uh, okay, so first of all, we will do a kind of a look at the model of a communication system, and we'll see where this topic of source coding fits into this overall diagram. And then towards the end of this topic, we will examine the binomial random variable that we have studied earlier. And we will use it to kind of construct a proof of some theory that we have already studied. Okay, so that is going to be the main content of this topic. Okay, so this diagram, I think you may have seen earlier. I put it in one of the labs, lab manuals. So this is probably a very realistic diagram of what today's communication system looks like. You know, it has transmitter, it has receiver, then there's this channel. Some of simple channel models we have been looking at. But the channel can be of many different varieties. At the transmitter side, the source can be analog. For example, it can be the spoken voice or in general, any audio, music, etc. Or it can be video. And in such types of sources, there is this analog to digital conversion required, which is made up of a sampling process and a quantization process. If the source is digital, for example, if you're writing an email to somebody, then obviously this A to D conversion is not needed because the output of the source itself is discretized. And then you'll be kind of entering right over here where I'm indicating here, right? So this would be the place where a discretized source will be generating its output and feeding it to the transmitter. Then that output goes through source encoding, which is a topic that we'll be studying. Encryption is another process which we will not be covering in this course. The output of encryption is passed through channel encoding, that we will also study. And then finally to the modulation. The modulation output is then goes out to the channel. And it is these three blocks, the source encoding block, the channel encoding, and the modulation, along with their counterparts at the receiver. The demodulation, the channel decoding, and source decoding are the topics that we will be studying. Now, I think one of the last things that I mentioned to you before the midterm exam is that the bias theory that we have studied so far actually already covers all the important concepts that you need to know to be able to kind of appreciate the theories underlying all these different techniques. So you'll see that we'll be making good use of some of the theoretical studies that we have done in terms of probabilities and estimation and detection and so forth. Okay, so let us begin by asking this question that, we have studied the concepts of entropy, we have studied the amount of information transfer which takes over, let us say, the binary symmetric channel. And you may have noticed that a lot of the times, these values, the entropy and the information, etc., they are not integer bits. They are fractional bits, sometimes even less than 1, maybe 0.73 or 0.35, etc. And so the question becomes, how can the bits be in fractional units? Bits are zeros and ones. That is what we call a bit. Bit is short of binary digit. So binary digit is not fractional. It is 0 or 1. So how can the bits be fractional? That is the answer that we were getting for entropy and information. So the way to think about this information processes, whether we consider the information being generated by the source or the information that is being communicated over a channel, is to not think of the outputs in isolation. Instead, we want to consider a sequence of symbols or a sequence of bits. And that is what is very common these days. If you are capturing a photo, that photo gets stored in a file, and that file has a sequence of symbols which capture or represent the photo that you have taken. Even if you look at this particular slide, the information in this slide is not just one symbol, right? It is a sequence of symbols, where the symbols are the letters of English alphabet. And so almost always the information generation and its transfer happens through a large sequence of symbols or bits. And so when we consider a large sequence, then this number such as half a bit starts making sense. Basically, what 0.5 bits represents is that an information source is actually generating only half the amount of information that it is pumping out. The rest is not informative, right? So if suppose a particular source has an entropy of 0.5 bits and it generates 10 million bits, then the fact that the entropy of the source is only half a bit tells us that it should be possible to squeeze those 10 million bits down to 5 million bits. If the entropy was 1/3, then we would be able to squeeze it down to only 3.3 million bits. If it was 1/10, then we would be able to compress the output of the source down to only 1 million bit instead of 10 million bits. And this is important because, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, they are getting so much data on their servers these days. And so if we can find a way to compress the data, then the storage becomes simpler. Even the transmission over a communication channel, the requirement becomes less. And so that is why the concept of entropy is highly relevant, very crucial in today's world. It tells us that, okay, this source, although it is appearing to generate 10 million bits worth of information, in fact, in terms of really representing its output, we need only h of x times 10 million. And so that is where the fractional values of bits make sense. Okay. Let us look at the other topic that we'll be studying down the road, and that is the topic of channel coding.
Sir,
Yes,
Sir.
Vihan?
sir, what would happen if the entropy is more than 1?
Yeah, so you probably have noticed that if I consider, well, by the way, it is a good question, nice question. So suppose if x is a binary source, right? It's a Bernoulli variable, then its entropy is limited to what range?
Sorry, sir, can you repeat?
0 to 1.
The entropy of a Bernoulli variable is limited to the range of.
0 to 1.
So if we say that X is Bernoulli, if X is binary random variable, then your question is meaningless. Binary variable cannot have entropy which is greater than 1. But if, let us say that X is 4 array, meaning that it takes one of 4 values. In that case, what will be the range of entropy of X?
0 to 4?
0 to 2, correct.
Sorry,
And
0
the
to 2. Yes.
entropy will be maximized. It will be 2 bits. When does that happen? When entropy
When
becomes 2
all
bits?
are when PMF is equally distributed in all four.
Can you repeat again?
Sir, then the probability of their occurrence is equal 0.25, 0.25, 0.25.
Correct. Very good. So in that case now, the entropy will be 2 bits, and that happens when the PMF is uniform. But now, if the PMF is not uniform, then instead of 2, it will become, let us say, maybe 1.5 bit or maybe 1.2 bits. And so then what we have to consider is that for every 2 bits worth of information that these source generates, actually the real information is only 1.2 bits. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let us consider another case where the information transfer rate is 1/3 of a bit. So what then it tells us is that over this communication channel, only 1/3 of the bits that the sender emits can actually be successfully received, because the channel is inherently noisy, right? I mean, we have seen the Bayesian model of a channel, and there is this crossover probability of P. And in presence of that flipping of the bits that the channel introduces for the binary symmetric channel case, obviously you cannot hope to transmit all the bits that you're sending, because some of the bits will get flipped and they will not be successfully received. So what this information transfer value tells us is how many bits can be successfully received. And so suppose now if the source has 10 million bits to transfer, it actually should transmit 30 million bits. And those extra 20 million bits ensure that the actual informative content of 10 million bits gets through without errors. So the source ended up transmitting 30 million, but because the information rate is 1/3, the receiver ended up getting 10 million bits of information. And but those 10 million bits are actually what the source wanted to transmit. So all of the information generated by the source was successfully received at the receiver. The only price that we paid is that although we had to send only 10 million bits, we ended up transmitting 30 million bits. That was the price we paid. But the benefit that we got is our 10 million bits reached the receiver without any error. Right? So that is what this fractional value of information rate means. And when I say that this is the price we pay, instead of 10 million, we have to transmit 30 million. I mean, you understand that that is the price, right? I mean, that is the real cost. Today, if you want to transmit data through your cell phone, you pay. You pay money. And so if you have only 10 million bits to transmit, but because the channel is noisy and because you want to make sure that those 10 million bits get through, if you have to end up transmit 30 million bits, it means that you are paying. You are incurring a cost. And it's not just the pocket money that I'm talking about. This cost is in terms of the use of the communication channel. Basically, the communication channel is a resource, and we end up using that resource 3 times as much. This also relates to the bandwidth, in fact. We will see that later on. Suppose we have 10 million bits that we want to transmit over, let us say, I don't know, maybe 1 minute, right? Maybe those 10 million bits are for a video. That video is 1 minute long. And so we're transmitting this 10 million bits over 1 minute. Now, because of the noise introduced by the channel, if you have to transmit 30 million bits, then that is fine, but you better do it also over 1 minute only. You don't want to take 3 minutes to transmit 30 million bits. Why is that?
વાટકામાં દે તો એકદમ
Any idea?
વાટકા હોય તો ખાવાની મજા આવે એમ
Did you understand the question? Okay, so the question is that suppose we have a video which is worth 10 million bits. Maybe the size of the video is 10 million bits. And let us assume that it's a live video, right? I mean, it's not like stored video. And so somebody is, let us say, sitting in front of a camera, and the video camera output is being transmitted over a communication channel, and the video camera generates 10 million bits over 1 minute. But because the channel over which these bits are getting transferred has an information rate of 1/3 of a bit, as we have noted here, we have to somehow convert this 10 million bits into 30 million bits, because only 1/3 of the bits actually get through. And so only when you transmit 30 million bits, then you can reliably send 10 million bits. My question is that this 30 million bits, you better transmit over the same 1 minute duration. Why is that?
Sir, so that the video received also works for 1 minute without any lags.
Yeah, I think that is in general. I mean, yeah, overall, it's the right answer. You see, if you send this 30 million bits over 3 minutes, then what is going to happen is this 30 million bits, remember that 20 million bits are actually not the video. This is what the channel encoding process introduces. They are like protection bits. So the decoder will strip off this extra 20 million bits, and then it will get back this original 10 million bits back.
So then what is the use of that extra 20 million bits?
Those 20 million bits will make sure that the actual informative content gets received without errors.
But sir, for that same 30 million bit to transfer in 1 minute, bandwidth should be high.
So that is where I was getting at, that because we want to transmit 30 million bits over 1 minute, the bandwidth requirement will go up because now we are transmitting the bits much faster, actually 3 times faster. And whenever we transmit bits faster, we need proportionately larger amount of bandwidth. So the point that I wish to make is that this carries a cost. But the benefit that you get is your information is received without any error. Although the information is passing through a noisy channel, this channel coder turns it into as if it was a noiseless channel. So that is the benefit that you get. So we have already studied the repetition coding, right? Specifically the repeat by 3 coding. Someone asked, what is the use of those extra 20 million bits? Well, what is the use of repeating 1 bit 3 times?
To increase the accuracy.
To increase the probability of successful reception, or to decrease the probability of error. So the question becomes, well, in this case, can we just repeat each of these 10 million bits 3 times? And will that give us 0 errors? Because remember, that is what we want. We want this 10 million bits to be received without any error. Well, you have done some lab problems. I think you're doing this 5th lab right now. And you may have noticed that repetition coding doesn't give you 0 probability of error. And that is because it is too simple. It's nice in the sense that it's very simple. So implementing repetition coding is very, very easy. But the problem is that it won't give you 0 errors. So that is where the channel coding becomes a very nice topics to study, because there are some really smart ideas by which fancier versions of this repeat by 3 or repeat by 5 or repeat by 7 schemes have been invented, and they work much better. So we will be looking at the channel coding topic in detail later on. Again, I think I have mentioned to you that this entire topic of CT111 is like paradise for those who like to think. And so channel coding for a long time was considered a topic which people who like to think and people who like to come up with smart ideas, they would love to work on. And so there are actually indeed some really nice, smart ideas that have been invented in terms of channel coding. Okay, and then the last topic of modulation is also something that we have studied. We have studied this in the lab and in the previous lecture. So what is modulation? So we have seen that the actual information is generated whenever the source selects one symbol out of a set of symbols. And that selection is probabilistic. And if suppose the set of symbols has 2 possibilities, then each selection can be represented in terms of 1 bit. If the set of symbols has 4 possibilities, then each selection can be represented in terms of 2 bits, and so on. So the information is generated and measured in terms of bits. But these bits are not suitable for transmission, long distances. It doesn't work that way. The bits can't travel. You can't switch on and switch off something, maybe a light bulb or something, and say that, okay, I'm generating and transmitting bits. That doesn't work out very well. What you need is electromagnetic waves. And in fact, even in this analogy I gave you, that you generate and transmit bits by switching on and switching off a light bulb, you are actually using electromagnetic waves, because light is an electromagnetic wave. And in that analogy, you are actually modulating that wave. Switching on means that you increase the amplitude. Switch off means you turned it zero. That is called the modulation. Think of modulation as if you have a flag on a rooftop and the flag starts waving because of the wind. So that wavy part of it, you can think of it as modulation. Well, the EM wave itself is a wave. I mean, it is already waving. So when we say we modulate the EM wave, what we mean is that we modify some characteristic of the EM wave, either the amplitude or the phase or the frequency. And that modification or the modulation is performed using the informative bits.
Sir,
Yes?
sir, how actually these bits are transferred into optical fiber? Are we doing infrared rays are on and off frequently? In that way, bits are transferred in practical.
Right. So the one simple example is what I gave you. Suppose you bit 1%, then you turn on the EM wave. When you have to send bit 0, you turn it off.
Okay.
And then that gets transmitted either by the antenna, or if it's an optical fiber, that light actually gets transmitted through the fiber. And that is called amplitude modulation. At the receiver, whenever the receiver sees the wave, it says that, okay, I'm receiving bit 1. When it doesn't see anything, when it sees basically no signal at all, or just the noise, then it says that I am getting bit 0. There are other techniques where instead of switching on and switching off the EM wave, you control the phase of the wave. So you're transmitting the wave at certain starting phase, and then whenever you want to transmit bit 0, you make the phase 180-degree opposite. And then again, when you want to transmit bit 1, you make it the original starting phase. And that is called binary phase shift keying, BPSK. And that BPSK, because it is introducing 180-degree shifts in the phase, it can be thought of as multiplying the symbol by 1 or minus 1. 180-degree phase shift is same as multiplication by -1. And so that is why in our BPSK modulation example, we have simplified the modulation scheme to say that whenever bit 1 has to be sent, the EM wave value is some plus a volt. And then when bit 0 has to be sent, it becomes minus a volt. That minus because it is 180-degree phase shift. So the challenge in terms of modulation technique is that the received modulated wave has to be converted back to the bits. And it is this demodulation which has to be dealt with in the presence of noise. And how to demodulate in the presence of noise is what we have studied already through the Bayesian theory, at least for the BPSK case. But we'll be expanding upon this modulation topic. Okay, so these 3 slides: source coding, channel coding, and modulation demodulation. This is going to take us pretty much, I would say, the rest of the semester. And all these 3 are central topics for a communication system, as you can see from this diagram. And what may be surprising to you is that you already know the answer. If some of you are very creative, then knowing all that you know so far through the lectures that we had before the exam, you can actually develop yourself all of the things that we will be studying over pretty much the rest of the semester. I mean, I won't ask you to do it because there are a lot of details, and it would not be fair on you to do it on your own. But what I'm trying to say is that the conceptual foundation is already laid out. If you have done well in the midterm exam, if you have done well in the labs, then I think you are all set. You will be having no problem in understanding the topics that we'll be studying. Just hold on, please. Okay, so now let us begin with the topic of source coding. You know, I already said that suppose if the entropy is half a bit, and then if the source generates 10 million bits, then actually you need to store or you need to transmit only 5 million bits. But then you may ask, well, what about the remaining 5 million bits? Why can't, why are they not important? How can we get rid of them? Well, I'll give you one analogy that, I mean, nowadays we don't do that as much, but when I was your age or maybe even younger, emails and all that were not there. Internet was not there actually. And the communication used to happen a lot via writing a postcard or a letter, postal mail. Now, today, even, although we may not use our home address for writing postcards or letters, you know the way the home addresses are written. I mean, you would write the name, your name, and then you will say maybe the building number or the apartment number, the name of the society, then the name of the road. Then you will say that, okay, it is near this particular landmark. And then you will say it is close to the other landmark. And you will say it is opposite the third landmark. And you will have multiple such lines of address, where you will say near, opposite, close to, and so on. And then you will say this is the name of the town, this is the name of the taluka, this is the name of the district, this is the name of state, this is the name of country. And then even if that is not enough, you will put a pin code. Well, do you really need to specify your address to that last level of detail? No, right? You can get away by using just 2 or 3 lines of address. Your name, the name of the building and the apartment, and then the name of the street, the name of the town, that's it. But you add zip code and you add all this additional information, which is completely redundant. You don't really need to add that part at all. But why do we still need it? Why do we still add the redundant part of information in writing our address?
To send it to accurate address.
Exactly. We want to be very confident. We want to rest easy. We don't want to have a worry that somehow somebody will misinterpret our address. Or to put it in the context of City 111, suppose I write the address, and let us say some of the letters turn into some other letter. Maybe my handwriting is not very good, and whenever I write I, it gets interpreted as maybe L or something. And if I make enough number of such writing errors, or my handwriting is not very clear, maybe the postal delivery guy will take my letter to some other address. If you think about it, that is a lot like what happens over a binary symmetric channel. And so we are adding this extra information to protect the actual real information that we are transmitting. We remember we need to transmit only 10 million bits, but we end up sending 30 million bits. Those additional 20 million bits are redundant, just the same way repeat by 3 coding, the extra 2 bits that you add is redundant bit. You can actually remove those 2 bits, and that 1 bit is all that you need. But you add those 2 bits, those extra 2 bits, to protect that 1 bit of information. The same way when we, instead of feeling comfortable by writing 3 lines of address, we end up writing 6 lines of address because we want to be confident that even if there are handwriting errors or interpretation errors on the part of the person who reads our written address, our letter reaches the right place. And so that is very typical. Almost all the sources generate information which has some redundancy. It has been what? Probably close to 1 hour since I started. Yeah, about 55 minutes. Really, if I didn't want to be redundant, I could have conveyed you the same information in only 10 minutes. But then the information would have been the same, but you would have felt that, okay, some truck hit us or what? I mean, you would not understand what came at you. If I speed it up, if I compress what I want to say, instead of 50 minutes, if I compress it down to 10 minutes, it will become hard for you to understand. So redundancy helps you actually convey the message in a clear manner, in an unambiguous manner, in a manner which does not become confusing at the receiver. So all the information source generate information in a redundant manner. That is how it is. I mean, that is how the Mother Nature works. And so the source coding says that, yes, fine. The source is generating redundant information for multiple reasons, but I don't need to store all of that, or I may not need to transmit all of that redundant information. And that, as we have noticed earlier, it is very useful in today's world. If you can store less number of bits, that directly translates to a lot of value. So that is the source coding problem. What are the good algorithms that can allow you to do this redundancy removal? And what is the maximum amount of redundancy removal that you can achieve? Okay, so that is the definition of the problem that we'll be studying. The reason for studying the source coding, we have already talked about. I mean, I cannot overemphasize the value of source coding as a IICT problem. I have said to my other students that if you become very good in source coding, then I would bet that you are likely to become very rich. Because there are companies which actually their whole technology is source coding technology. And then they develop their patent, they develop their technology, and if it works well enough, then companies like Google or Facebook or Amazon, they just go and buy that company. And the co-founder, they become super rich. Okay, so I hope that I have motivated the problem clearly enough. Okay, so let us define the source coding terminology. So we'll be studying a type of source which is known as discrete memoryless source. Well, discrete part you would understand. It is a source which generates discretized information. Meaning that it is not a human speech. Human speech cannot be discretized. It is an analog waveform that the microphone generates. But if you are writing something, then obviously it is a discretized information that you are generating, because English is a set of symbols, the alphabet of English, or any other language, Gujarati or Hindi, etc. So basically, we are going to consider only discretized symbols, an information source which generates discretized symbols. I mean, we already considered Bernoulli source. It's obviously a discretized source because it generates either zeros and ones. We have considered maybe Fourier source, which is also discretized because it generates one of four symbols and so on. But then the other part that we are going to assume that is that the source is memoryless, which means that the symbol generation is happening independent of each other. Different symbols are independently generated. That is what we mean by the memoryless part of it. So let me ask you this question. Suppose there is some author who is writing his essay or writing his novel or maybe a play or a movie script. So consider that as one source. Obviously, it's a discrete source. And now consider a monkey who happens to be sitting near a typewriting machine and just keeps on pressing some keys on the typewriter. Who do you think would be called the memoryless source?
Second one.
The second one.
Correct. It's the second source which is memoryless, because when I or you write something, our one word is connected to the other. And even the letters of individual word are not independent of each other. But if some process is generating these symbols in a very random manner, then that would be called a memoryless source. So we are going to simplify a lot, and we are going to assume that the source is memoryless. Now you may say that, well, what is the point of studying a memoryless source when all the real world sources are likely to be having memory? The answer to that is that if we grasp the concept behind source coding for DMS, then the same concepts can be applied to sources with memory. So it is better to study something simpler and then expand on it to make it become more representative, rather than right away start with something which is complicated. Okay. So now let us define the source coding algorithm. So it is actually very simple. It's a rule, it's a kind of a dictionary which maps the symbols that are generated into a sequence of bits. So suppose the DMS has 4 symbols: x1, x2, x3, x4. Then we can have a type of source coding technique which is known as fixed length coding. And the reason it is called fixed length is that this mapping is of the same length, 2 bits each. Right? Now, in contrast, there is something called variable length coding, for which this mapping is not of the fixed length. X1 may be taking 1 bit, X2 may be taking 2 bits, X3 will take 3 bits, X4 may again take 2 bits. So this is the variable length scheme. Now, whenever we consider variable length, we have to be a little careful, because what happens is once you introduce variability in the length, you can run into a potential or a possible scheme, which is the one shown here. So x1 is mapped to 1, x2 is 0, 0, x3 again here, I made typos, x3 is 0, 1, and x4 is 1, 0. The problem with this particular scheme is that if suppose you get a bit sequence 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, then should I decode it as 0, 0, which will be x2, then 1, which is x1, and then again 0, 0, so that is x2, and then again 1, so that will be x1. So this is one way that I can decode it. But then I can also decode it as 0, 0, which is x2, then 1, 0. So I'll put comma here now. But 1, 0 is x4, so this is x4. And then 0, 1, which is back to x3. So you see that the same sequence of bits in this variable length coding scheme can be decoded in 2 different ways. And how does the receiver know whether the transmitter actually sent x2, x1, x2, x1, or it sent x2, x4, x3? The receiver has no way to know that. So for the variable length, we want unique decodability. The receiver should not have to deal with this type of ambiguity. I will write it down here. The receiver should not have to deal with this type of ambiguity. It's very clear this is not good. A formal way to say the same thing is that we want the variable length scheme to be uniquely decodable. The fixed length scheme is always uniquely decodable.
Sir,
Yes.
so in this one, along with the data code, can we not send a code which contains the length of the strings
A good
so
point.
that it would be easier?
Yeah, that is a good point. But remember, if you want to send the length, it will take extra bits. And the whole purpose of source coding is to reduce the bits.
Yes.
So length will take more bits. The other option could be that you send this comma. But the comma will be now an additional symbol. So instead of having 4 symbols, you will need 5 symbols. And when you have more number of symbols, you need more number of bits again. So that is why in the source coding scheme, you don't want to even use any extra symbol such as comma and so on. So now consider this other scheme, which is also variable length, but you will see that it is uniquely decodable. You cannot come up with any sequence of bits when this is the mapping, where you will run into this type of ambiguity problem. And the reason is because in this uniquely decodable scheme, X1 to X7, none of the code word is a prefix of the other. Whereas over here, you will see that X1 here, X1, is a prefix of X4, right? This 1 here is a symbol for X1. I mean, sorry, it's a representation of symbol X1. So what we want for unique decodability, for not having this type of ambiguity, is that none of the code words should be a prefix of another code word. This is called prefix-free condition. Okay, so we will consider only the prefix-free code. What are these prefix-free codes? We'll get to it. Okay, so I'll put some visual representations which will make it a little more clearer. But before that, let us ask this question, that why do we even want to consider variable length code when fixed length codes never have this ambiguity problem? Any idea?
Because if some system has more than 100 symbols, then the length of the symbol which represents a particular element would increase, and we don't want that many elements to represent, just like one would be represented by 00001.
No.
Also, in fixed line, we don't know that the information pairing will be in order of the length of the codes.
Sir, like
Means
if we want to transmit 15, then we'll have to transmit several ones. But for transmitting one, we only need 1 bit, like one. So So,
Memory.
so for digit 1, we'll have to transmit 1 bit, but for 15, we'll have to transmit 4 bits. So in variable length, we can decide depending on the digits, how much we have to transmit.
If some digit is frequently occur, then we will give it a single digit. So the
Yes. Who is saying this? Kunj?
part.
Parth, can you expand on that?
Suppose we are sending 1 very frequently or 15 very
Yes.
frequently, then instead of sending 4 bits for 15, we can send only just 1 bit. So
Exactly. That is the answer that I was looking. So when different symbols have vastly different probabilities, you know that E happens very frequently compared to Q or X or Z. Then if you end up using the same length for E and Q, you are being inefficient. Remember, the whole idea of source coding is to be efficient. You want to use as less number of bits as possible. So why, if I end up using same number of bits for E and Q, why am I wasting the bits? Well, we have studied this definition of information, which says that the information generated by E is much smaller than that generated by Q because E has a much higher value of probability. So that is why this information in number of bits is ideally the length that we should use for representing the source symbol. Maybe the information for E is maybe 1.2 bits, but for Q maybe it is 7 bits. So then obviously I want the representation for E to be maybe 1 bit or 2 bit long only. But for Q I should reserve more than 7 to 8 bits. And as we go along this topic, we will see that the highest amount of efficiency you can get if you somehow manage to do this mapping that we had here, where these lengths are exactly equal to I of k. If you do that, then you are done. You have solved the problem of source coding. Okay, so now let us look at the visualization that I mentioned, and it will be in terms of a binary tree. So this is the scheme that I had shown to you here, uniquely decodable. X1 to X7. X1 is 0, 0, 0, X2 is 0, 0, 1, 0, X3 is 0, 1, and so on. So that is shown here on a binary tree. This binary tree, whenever you go this way, left-hand side, it means 0. Whenever you go right-hand side, it means 1. So to reach this particular node, we take 3 turns, all left side, and so X1 is 0, 0, 0. X2 is 0, 0, and then 1, and then again 0. X3 is 0, 1. X4 is 1, 0, and so on. Now, unique decodability, which is same as prefix-free condition, what it means is that none of these assigned nodes of this tree belong to subtree of some other assigned code. So you will notice that as soon as I assigned X3 to this node. All of this I am ruling out. Same way here, this subtree got ruled out. Why? Because I put x4 here. Similarly, this subtree got ruled out because I put x1 here, and so on. So this is called the prefix-free condition. Whenever you put a code on a particular node, the subtree of that node, you never use it to put another code. On the other hand, the ambiguous example that we had looked here, how does it look like? Well, it looks like this. So this is fine. No problem here. This is also not belonging to subtree of any other assigned code. This is also not belonging to subtree of any assigned code. But x4 is a problem. x4 belongs to the subtree of x3, which is to say that x3 is the prefix of x4. Both are the same statement. x3 is the prefix of x4, which is to say that x4 belongs to the subtree of x3. And so that is why this scheme is ambiguous. Whereas this scheme is not ambiguous. Okay, so that is it. We will end today's lecture here.